Thank you all for coming this evening, and I have the honor of introducing our speaker this evening. I'd like to share a few words about our speaker, Dr. Monica Moya, research engineer at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Dr. Monica Moya is a biomedical engineer researcher at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, where she works as the principal investigator and as a technical lead on 2 bioengineering products, including the 3D bioprinting of human tissues. That's super cool, right? A native of the LA area, she returned to the West Coast to do her postdoctoral research at UC Irvine as a National Institutes of Health, or the NIH, Ruth Kirchstein NRSA Fellow. Her research has resulted in 22 peer-reviewed publications, 2 book chapters, and numerous national and international conference presentations. Outside of work, Dr. Moya seeks opportunities to support STEM education and engage the public on the benefits of science and engineering. She was recently recognized by the Empower Her Institute with the Millennial Leader Award, a prestigious award that acknowledges women under 40 who are accomplished professionals working for the advancements of girls and women in the arts, business, public service, and STEM fields. And by Diablo Magazine in their 2016 40 Under 40 issue. It's an annual list. I know probably several of you know there's ones for a lot of cities around that it publishes 40 up-and-coming people from the area. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Monica Moya, who is here to talk to us about disrupting the dominant narrative.
Thanks. Thank you. And if you want to remove that, you can take that off.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you, and good evening, ladies. I have to say this is pretty exciting to be here and to be the dominant gender in a scientific conference, because that's usually not the case, right? When I was an undergrad, I attended some SWE meetings, but I never got to go to one of the conferences. So I actually never got to experience what it was like to be in a female-dominated scientific conference until a few months ago when I went to Grace Hopper. Have any of you guys gone there before? It's an amazing conference. If you have a chance to go, you should go. It's huge. It's this year I believe it was 17,000 people, and of those 17,000, 16,000 were women, and it was amazing. And it was such a different vibe to be at a conference like that. One of the things that I was struck was by how friendly people were. You know, everybody was chatting it up. When I boarded my plane in Oakland to go to Houston, most of the people there were headed towards the Grace Hopper event, and it was just, I just remember being on the airplane and like thinking, wow, I can hear so many different conversations going on, and everybody's just super excited and friendly. The only con I would say is that the bathroom lines were ridiculous. Like that was just, yeah, it was, there were a couple times where like some of the women had to get together and, use the men's room, but we'd like make sure that nobody would be coming in, but anyway. For me though, what I really noticed when I was at that conference was like how relaxed I felt. I was amazed that, there were people that were wearing jeans and shirts, and then there were people that were dressed up, and it was just a really comfortable atmosphere, and I really felt like that I was at ease, because I didn't have to think about that being a female engineer or having to deal with, being assertive enough but not being too aggressive and none of that stuff. So it was just like this weight was lifted off of me where I didn't have to constantly be thinking about that kind of stuff and didn't have to worry about belonging. And this concept of belonging is such a basic need. It's as much of a basic need as like hunger or thirst, because if you think about it, when we're born, we're physically born attached to somebody else. We're born completely useless, and like the only thing that we can do as a baby is bond and interact with somebody because our survival depends on it, right? Like if you're not able to bond to the people that are taking care of you, you're not going to have very much of a chance at surviving. So this is why sort of I wanted to talk about belonging, because it becomes a challenge when you don't fit the mold. And for me at least, I feel like even from my beginnings, I really didn't fit the mold. So I'll start off with, Jessica did a great job introducing me, so I won't go through all these details, but these are the details that, like, if you were to Google me, you would find out about me, sort of the stuff that anybody would see professionally. But when I look in the mirror, I see this little kid. So this is me, 4-year-old me. And these are some things that, like, I think are important about me that other people can't see. I'm an animal lover. I'm an avid runner. I think I'm pretty good at baking. Huge Harry Potter fan, like dressed up for the movies Harry Potter kind of fan, geek, major geek. I have a thing for teacups, complete bookworm, and yeah, I know a lot about goats. And I think like I was destined to be kind of the oddball out from my birth, essentially. So I was born to 2 immigrant parents. Here they are, my mom and dad, who were born in Mexico, and they had the challenge of raising a kid in a culture and in a country that they had never been in before. And so I was already destined to be weird because I had parents that were trying to raise a Mexican kid but in an American culture. And so it meant that we were like that weird Mexican family. And I mean that weird, the family that you're in. So I grew up in Pasadena, which for those of you that are maybe not familiar with the area, it's not a farming area, it's very much a city, and yet we had chickens. And we had a goat, so yeah. We were that family where you're like, did I think I heard a chicken? Yeah, that was my family. So I was, like I said, I was destined to be weird. So these are my parents. These are obviously recent pictures because back in the day we didn't have digital pictures. And now they live in San Bernardino, which is still not really a farming area, but they have a lot more room and they've accumulated a lot more goats. A lot more goats. Yeah, that's my grandpa. He also lives with us. He's 94. He's pretty awesome. So yeah, my parents, they're eccentric, and so, I was already destined to kind of be an oddball. But growing up, I never really even realized that I was kind of weird, because you're just a kid, But I started even feeling weird around my family because first of all, I became addicted to books, and I love to read, and I started to even bring books at family functions, so when everybody else was like running around, with the cousins, I was in a corner reading my books. My mom used to call me a come libros, which is one that eats books. So I kind of felt that I was a little bit the odd one in the family for that kind of reason, but I didn't really think much about this concept of belonging until I hit middle school, because middle school, it's all about who's in and who's not, right? And not surprisingly, I was not. But it's okay. And that's probably where I learned my first lesson. So I really was like the kid that got picked on. And I used to get picked on because, for all sorts of reasons, but the one that really made me realize that belonging does not mean that you have to fit in or assimilate. It's much more different than just playing the part or looking the part. When I was when I was 13, I used to get called the chia pet because I had hairy legs, and my mother wouldn't let me shave my legs because she was a freak and didn't have any hair on her legs, so she didn't understand how to shave your legs or why it was important, and because she was a mom, she was like, oh, I think it's beautiful that you have hair on your arms and legs, and I was like, no, it is not beautiful, Mom. So when I was 13, I begged her that all I wanted was to shave my legs, and so she let me, but she didn't know how to teach me to shave my legs, so she handed me the razor, and I didn't want to ask my dad, hey Dad, can you teach me how to shave my legs, right? Like I was 13, that would have been the worst thing to do, right? So I took a dry razor to my leg. Yeah, I know, it was awful. And I was so hurt when my peers did not acknowledge the fact that I had tried so hard to fit in, I realized, because they just found another reason to make fun of me for. That's kind of where I realized, to belong does not mean that you have to be like everybody else. And in some cases, it's okay. If you're not fitting in, then maybe there's something wrong. Maybe that's not the group for you. And so I learned that lesson as a 13-year-old. I realized, oh, this is ridiculous. I've given myself razor burns, and that's not enough for this group. Maybe there's something different that maybe is out there that's better for me. And so again, I turned to my books and, decided to not have to worry about that kind of stuff. stuff. And luckily, I had teachers that really liked me because, I was a kid that was reading and I was a good kid. And my teacher told me that it was okay that I was a little different, that it meant that I was special. And she told me, you're going to go to this all-girls private high school, that it's what's called Mayfield Senior School. And I remember telling her, like, oh, I can't go to that high school because it costs too much. At the time, that high school cost as much as going to a UC. So this was, a pretty wealthy kind of school. But she encouraged me to apply, and I did get in, and I got a scholarship. And I remember being terrified, thinking, oh, I'm definitely not going to fit in here. Like, now I'm, that weird kid that has burritos in her lunch and smells like a goat and is a bookworm, and now you're sending me into a place where people are in a different socioeconomic bracket. It's not going to work. But I was surprised that it actually was a really welcoming environment. And the part that I realized was sort of freeing was the gender part. So it was an all-girls school. And having grown up in a really male-dominated culture, it was just like a weight had been lifted off of me, because I didn't have to worry about that. Like, this was an environment that was very pro-female. And it really allowed me to sort of explore the other parts that made me without having to be burdened by, what your culture was dictating you to be. And I really loved the school, and I started to, become even more different. Like, I was listening to country music, and yet I was, listening to bolero music, and I was just like this weird person that was becoming of these two cultures. But what was happening was I was feeling like I was distancing myself from my family, because I really was not looking like them anymore. I felt like there was a cultural part of me that was completely different than like this educated part of me. And it really came sort of to like a heightened war when I had to go to college. Because my parents, and neither one of them had much of an education. My dad had a third grade education, and my mom had up to a sixth grade education. So they really didn't know how to do this whole college thing. So I had to add like another label, being a first-gen student, that completely made me feel like I was the outsider. They really didn't want me to go away to college. I grew up in Southern California, and the college I chose was at Northwestern. And they tried all sorts of things to get me to stay. My mother was like, oh, people are going to say that, that you hate us and that's why you're going away, or, how are we going to do things without you? Because I used to be like the one that translated. I used to pretend to be my mom when I was like 9, and they would be like, are you sure you're Mrs. Moya? And I'd be like, yes, my social security is this. And I'd be like, all right, whatever. So my mom was just like, what are we going to do without you? All of this guilt. And I remember her being like, she even got to the point where she was like, if you go to college, people are going to think that you're pregnant and we sent you away. And I was like, Mom, you need to get new friends, because that's just ridiculous. And I remember her at one point being like, what are we going to tell people? And I was like, I don't know, that your daughter's going to Northwestern University? I mean, how is this? So I felt like there was this divide, and I just didn't belong with my family. And yet at the same time, the education piece, I felt like an outsider because I didn't know how to do this college thing. But again, I had really good mentors that said, it's okay, you'll figure it out, your parents will be okay. And I went ahead and went to college, and then experienced another shock, because I was going from an all-girls school to going into an engineering school, where it was like, whoa, what happened here? And I initially didn't start off as engineering. I was a liberal arts major because I liked math, and I thought, okay, math is for counting money, so I guess I'm going to be a business person. But I realized when I was looking through the course catalog, oh, this engineering thing sounds kind of interesting. There's, a lot of math and science together, and you can do stuff with it. And so I switched over. But I was surprised at how male-dominated it is and how different the environment was. The guys talked more. They had a problem when I was trying to lead, and I was used to leading, and I didn't know that women were not supposed to be good at math and science, because everybody at my school was a woman and they were good at everything. And so I just didn't know what the norm was, and I kept feeling like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing wrong here. I felt like I was at a battle, right? Like I felt like I didn't fit in. I was at a battle, and at the same time I'm dealing with all this other stuff that you deal with as being a first-gen student, not knowing what you're doing. I lucked out that I started to do research, and I was working in the lab with the only female in the biomedical engineering faculty. And it was her that told me, you should go to grad school, because I'd been in her lab for 3 years doing research. And it was funny because it never even occurred to me to go to grad school. And I think part of it was because I just didn't see myself there. I didn't see very many females, engineers, professors, certainly not anybody that was a woman of color. And it wasn't that I felt that that was a not supportive environment. It just honestly never occurred to me because I just never saw somebody that looked like me. But I was glad that I had this person that was telling me, you should go on, you're great, you're gonna do good things. And so I went on to grad school, and my mentor there was a male. He was a white male, but I remember that he was a first-gen student himself too, and we connected on that part. And that's when I realized that this being different thing was actually a positive, because I could relate to people even if I had all these cards that I could relate to people on, right? Like either maybe the first gen, maybe being female, engineer, I had these things that can make me bond. And his first set of students so we were his first set of students. He had 3 that he took on that year, and they were female. And that's when I realized the importance of really having your own community. And so I learned that one of the ways to deal with feeling like an outsider is to just create your own communities where you feel like you're included. And it may not, if you're somebody like me that's very fragmented, you may not be able to just form one community, and it may take several. So I'll walk you through a couple of my communities that I have formed. So in the top right, those are 2 engineers, Vanessa Tolosa and Sue Singer. Suze is a computer engineer, and Vanessa is a chemical engineer. And these are the women at my work that I go to when I need to vent about stuff that's happened that maybe they understand from a woman's perspective. And then in the middle, I've got my Latina badass sisters. And it's funny because these women, I never grew up with these women, and I only met them so I was a Gates Millennium Scholar, which is a scholarship that all 4 of us got. And so through different organizations, I met these women, and they also happen to be runners. And so every year we run at least 2 half marathons. I'm actually running one not next week, but the week after in DC with these same women. And this actually was taken in San Jose. So this is a San Jose rock and roll that it started literally a couple blocks away from here. So when I was coming here, I was like, whoa, this, is, I don't know, it's kind of cosmic that it would be in the same place, or sort of in the same starting place. But these are the women that when I'm feeling like I'm struggling professionally because of something Hispanic related. For example, I recently was told that I needed to maybe tone down my passion because it could be seen as aggressive. And it was kind of hurtful to me, because to me, my passion is my culture, and that's what makes me me. I speak with my hands, it's what makes me me. And so I felt really I don't know how to deal with this. And so I called them up, and they were the ones that were supportive, and they told me what struggles they've had. And actually, one of them, Cynthia, is staying with me this weekend because she's got a job fair thing, and she brought me this little gift. Yeah. And so this is cool because they get me, right? It's a goat, for those of you in the back that can't see. And she gave me a note that said, you're going to be a screaming success, because I told her that I had this thing. Pretty cool, right? And when she gave me this, I was just you just get me. And so that's really kind of the point of forming these communities. And so the women in the top right on your side, these are the women that I went to college with for both undergrad and grad. These were women in science. One was 2 biologists and a bioengineer. They ended up doing the med school route, all 3 of them, while I was doing grad school in Chicago. But we've had almost 10 years. Well, we had 10 years of education together, and then we're still the best of friends. We recently took a trip to Denver, and we got together. And then the people in the bottom that are in the bubbles, those are coworkers. Because when I got to the place where I'm at now, I found out that there was another label that I didn't fit, and that was my age. The national lab where I work, the average age there is 50-some, so I'm considered young there, which is weird because when I was a postdoc, I felt like I was older because everybody was an undergrad or a grad, so I thought I was older, but then I get to the lab and I find out that people look at me and they think I'm a kid. So we have this group of us that we call ourselves the Mod Squad, and again, we do silly little races and stuff. They're not the hardcore runners. Like, these are the people that will run with me, but there has to be beer at the end. And Mod Squad stands for mandatory after work drinking. So yeah, that's what we have on our shirts. But these are the people that, we get together and we talk about, what it's like, the challenges that you have being young in an organization, and how do you, prove yourself, and so it's important to have all these different groups of people, because then you don't feel like you're isolated. And I know that there's people that say, when you're doing this and putting labels, you're part of the problem. And I would say to those people that it's not. I mean, having these communities help you to not feel isolated. And there's nothing wrong with admitting that there's differences between us. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. And the belonging part is not necessarily that everybody has to be the same in a simulate. You just have to be in a community that celebrates the differences. And so it's important to really have this community to support one another. And for me, I have many different groups, because I don't just seem to fit in one group. And so, as I mentioned, that these groups really became pertinent to me in the career that I'm at now. As I mentioned, I have the fact that I'm young and Latina and an engineer in a very white, male-dominated, older environment. But then furthermore, I picked bioengineering, and I picked it, I think, initially because it kind of fit my style. It was like a little bit of everything, and that's kind of the way I felt. But what I found out was that I had to constantly explain to people what I am and what value I bring. And at work, I had that problem. At the time when I was hired, there was only one other bioengineer. And so when they hired me, I remember at my interview, they were like, "So what exactly do you do?" And I said, I do all the stuff that I presented. I do the cell culture, I do the modeling, I do the imaging, I do it all. And they were like, "Really? But no, what really do you do?" And so it was really hard, because I had to constantly explain to them that I do a little bit of everything, and that one of my strongest assets is that I'm really able to integrate things together, because I understand lots of pieces. And it's funny, because that's kind of the way I feel about my life. I feel that all of these fragmented pieces that for such a long time I stressed about because I didn't fit in, I didn't belong, were actually an asset. They were things that were helping me to relate to people better, that were helping me bring people and teams together. And so the last piece of advice is to show up and stand out, Embrace the fact that maybe you're different, and really, like, don't shy away from it. I think for such a long time, I did sort of, compartmentalize. And I would say, like, when I'm at work, I'm just going to be the professional me, and then when I'm at home, I don't want to make my parents feel bad, so I'm not going to nerd out about, NPR and stuff like that, because they're going to feel like, okay, you're up here and we're down here. And so what I found out was that it was actually kind of suffocating to do that, to be at work and not to be myself. And so what I realized that really what I should have been doing was embracing that. And I think initially I was hesitant to embrace that because I thought it would make other people uncomfortable. When honestly, I just didn't want to be the one that was uncomfortable. I didn't want to have to constantly explain to people. But I realized that it was me who wasn't giving people the opportunity to be open. And so the show up and stand out means, be yourself, show up and make yourself, make it a positive thing that you stand out. Like, yes, I walk into some rooms and it's just completely males, and a couple times I have to, think, okay, did I walk into the right meeting? And what I realize is, like, okay, don't shy away from that. Yeah, I'm going to walk into a room and I'm going to make heads turn. So why don't I use that to my benefit? Make it count. Make the fact that I'm going to be different and stand out an opportunity for me to make myself be known, and to share with them that, like, this is maybe not the dominant narrative, but this is one of the narratives, and it's important to contribute to the dominant narrative, especially when I think about what's happening now politically. That's a very divisive environment, and it seems like our differences are the problem, when really we should be looking at them as a way to sort of embrace it all, to celebrate our differences, to reach out across and say, like, hey, this is my perspective. And so I really think that it's important to embrace yourself, and embrace other people's differences as well, and to not be afraid to be uncomfortable. growth and being comfortable, like, don't coexist. So that's just part of it. That's part of the growing process, is actually allowing yourself to be uncomfortable and having those conversations, and give people the benefit of the doubt that, maybe they might ask you a really dumb question, but you're just going to have to, put up with it and explain to them. And so this is a quote that I actually have up on my desk that says, "Being different is one of the most beautiful things on earth. Embrace your you-ness." And I do that because I want to remind myself to not repress myself, to really embrace the fact that I'm me, and to also, like, not think that I have to change something about me. So, like, in the case where I was telling you, where I was told that I needed to tone down my passion, I went back to my supervisor and I said, "Can you give me something more concrete?" And I explained to her, like, this is what I'm hearing when you say this, and I understand that maybe passion is not something that is often seen, but this is how I am. And she really understood it. It led to a really good conversation, but I was completely terrified to have this conversation. I was like, maybe I'll just ignore it and pretend like it didn't happen. Like, I don't want to ruffle feathers. But as I realized, and after I talked to, like, my group of friends, I was like, no, I really do have to say something. And so by giving her the opportunity to hear my perspective, it really made her think. And I'm hoping that maybe in the future, when she feels like she has to give somebody that criticism, she'll do it in a way that is maybe won't be hurtful, but will help the person really grow and not stunt them. And so I want to leave some opportunity and time for questions. So with that, I'm just going to wrap it up and say thank you again for allowing me to be your keynote speaker. Thank you.
All right. Questions for Monica? Oh, all right.
What was your boss's response to telling them what you felt about them saying that you were being too passionate?
Initially there was a little bit of backpedaling where it was like, oh, it had nothing to do with your culture, blah, 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 But I explained to her, like, that's what I hear when you say something like that. When you don't give me constructive feedback that says, like, for example, maybe speak in slower, something like that. Because she was like, oh, that wasn't what I meant to say. It was that it's something that we like about you, that's one of the good things, that you get really excited about your work, but also when things go wrong, you also it's very visible on you when things are upsetting you. And so we had a back and forth dialogue, me saying basically, like, that yes, that's something that I have to work on, but it's also just part of me. Like, I wear my emotions on my sleeve, and maybe that's not a very professional thing, and maybe that's not what the dominant culture does, because the dominant culture is maybe men that are not as I don't want to say emotional, but I mean, like, because I don't want to go into stereotypes that, like, all women are emotional and men are, because we're not. But at least for me, culturally, expressing myself, like, that's just how we do it in my culture. Like, my mom and I have screaming fights, and then it's over and it's done with. And so the conversation ended up being one of, like, well, this is my experience, and I understand that I need to work on that, but at the same time, I want you as a supervisor to understand that this is me also, and that I think that there's a middle ground that has to be met. It's interesting because I'm also part of this Hispanic group on site, and they often ask us for feedback, and the director was like, oh, we really want to help get Hispanics up in the management position, so we're going to send you to, like, a training thing that teaches you how to be, the managers that we want you to be. And myself and a couple of other people said, yes, but we would like you to also take training in diversity, so that that as the culture is diversifying, that maybe some of the qualities that you put value on may only apply to the dominant culture. And so if you really want to see change, it has to be from both ends. It can't just be us trying to fit the mold that you're used to. It has to be also the people on the top understanding that the landscape is going to change, and so things that they maybe put value on has to also change. And it ended up being a good conversation, and I wouldn't have been able to have it if the supervisor wasn't somebody that I was open with. But it just bugged me, and I couldn't let it go, because that's just me. I have to say something. But I did take the time first to, like, calm down, because initially I was like, I'm too passionate? Yeah. So, yeah. There's a couple questions here.
Stacy's first? Okay, so Stacy's always first, all right.
You're cruel. Thank you for sharing your story. That was just absolutely fabulous, and you're so well spoken. You talked earlier about a bit of a disconnect with your family because they hadn't graduated from high school even, and you referenced your mentors, which I'm so glad you found those mentors. But how did you find those mentors, and who were they?
So initially, they kind of found me because they just saw like a little, lost kid. And I'm glad, because as a little kid, I definitely didn't know the importance of mentors. So when I was in high school and in middle school, I just had the good fortune that there were people around me. And I was the kind of kid that listened also. I was the kind of kid that was like, okay, if the adults are saying this, even though I feel a different way, I better listen to it. And in college, it became more of a conscious choice to find mentors and to realize that I can't do this alone. Like, I don't know what I'm doing here as a first-gen student. And so the research advisor, I accidentally fell in with that research lab because I was just going to, I initially started to do research because I needed a job, and I wanted extra credit too, so I never even put much thought into like, okay, if I'm gonna be a grad student, I better, there was no thought in that at all. But it was definitely in grad school that it became a conscious choice when I was starting to realize that there was just too many things that I wasn't getting, and all these challenges that I was having that I really needed to talk to people. And having that first core group of peers that started together, it made me realize the importance of being able to communicate with somebody and say, hey, I'm feeling this way, and have somebody give me that feedback. In my career now, because I understand the importance of mentors, I actually look for them. Usually jobs will have mentoring programs. Those are they're not very organic, so it's kind of hard. Like, there's a list of people that are willing to be your mentors, and you should just email them. And it's just not the right way. So I usually feel them out. I look to people that are above me, for sure, for mentors and guidance. And you probably have all heard of the difference between mentors and sponsors, right? Like, mentors are the ones that you can be real with and stuff, and sponsors are the ones that are supposed to be your advocates, and maybe not the people that you break down in their office, because these are the people that are just supposed to see the superstar you, and the mentors are supposed to be like, hey, stop doing that kind of thing. I'm not very good at finding sponsors for myself. I think that's a little bit difficult, but usually I have my mentor help me find those. And at work, the supervisor that I talk to is actually somebody I consider to be a mentor. And peer mentoring is also really crucial, because your mentor doesn't have to be somebody that's above you. It can be somebody that's at the same level, because that's also really important and helpful to be able to tell somebody, hey, I'm doing this, and they can tell you, oh, well, this is what works for me and stuff. But yeah, as an adult, the more conscious choice has been to find mentors, and a lot of it is just by talking to people. I'm not really much of a fan of the organized mentorship, because it's really awkward. I don't think I've ever had any lasting mentors from that. Conferences are a great way to find people, especially when you connect. Like, if you can see the person face to face and see how they're interacting with you, that helps. And usually people at conferences are very in that networking mode, and so it's easy to find somebody to connect with. So I would say probably through conferences would be the best way to find a mentor, but yeah, they're absolutely crucial. I mean, even if you're not as a fragmented person as I am, or as naive as I was in the process, it's beneficial at all ages too.
Hi, my name is Penny Wersing, and I have one comment. If you thought Grace Hopper was great, you need to come to We 17 in Austin this fall, because it's going to be really cool. But I also have a question. So you were first generation, and you really didn't have any role models. Have you turned around then and been able to impact some of the folks in your family or your circle?
Oh yeah, I sometimes describe it with some of my other first-gen students from my other first-gen peers, that I think I have a little bit of survivor's guilt, because I think how fortunate I was that things lined up for me. That not only was I in a place where I was prepared academically, but that I also happened to have people that I caught their eyes. And so there's a little bit of a survivor's guilt where I feel like I need, and I mean, I've had this even from when I went to college. especially because of the socioeconomic challenges that I had. Like I remember going to college, and the first time I bought books, they were like $600 total. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, my parents pay this in rent, and here I am, I dropped it in a minute, and like this is what they work for. So I always had it in the back of my mind. And I actually, and I see a lot of first-gen students do this too, I didn't want to go to grad school initially. I wanted to start working. I wanted to start helping my family that way. And thankfully in 2004, the economy was on its way down, so I couldn't find a job. Because if I had, I probably would have gone to get a job, and I wouldn't have gone to grad school, because I would have just decided I need to start helping my family and my community. Even when I was about to go to college, I almost did not go because my brother, who was 2 years older than me, knocked up his girlfriend. And my mom was like, oh, you have to stay, you have to help with the family. And I was like, yeah, I should, yeah. And to be honest, if I had stayed, I probably would have done community college, and I would have gotten ahead, but I wouldn't be the person that I am now, now I help my parents pay their mortgage, and I'm in a better place now. And if it hadn't been for mentors that said, hey, it's okay to be selfish, it's nothing wrong, I would have been in a completely different environment. And now that baby is 16. It's crazy. She just turned 16 last week, and she wants to go to college. And she talks to me about it, and I'm like, oh, yes. Like I couldn't, 18-year-old me would have never thought in the future that this little baby was going to be a girl and a daughter that was at some point also going to be at the same spot. Like when you're 18, you just don't have that kind of long-term mentality. And so I'm glad that I had mentors that said that. And so now I'm like super involved in doing community stuff. Tomorrow I'm a co-chair for the special activity of this Tri-Valley Expanding Your Horizons. It's for 6th through 9th grade middle school I guess 9th graders, middle school mainly, and it's for girls in the Tri-Valley area. So I'm involved with that. I do Sponsors for Educational Opportunity, which is out in San Francisco that is for low-income students that live in the city that go to public schools. And I serve as a professional mentor because that program is an amazing program. That program has it right that you really need to start building social capital early on, especially if you come from a disadvantaged background, because this is not something that's just easily handed to you. And so because I have lived that, I've been able to give back. But there were so many times that I was so ready to give back, and I'm glad I had mentors that kept saying, keep going further. You'll be in a better position to give back if you just allow yourself. And I had one mentor that told me, think about it like on an airplane, right? Like you have to put the mask on first before you can help the others around you, because if you don't put the mask on, if you start putting masks on everybody, you're going to pass out and you're not going to be able to help the people. And so that's what I tell myself, because sometimes I get all upset that I'm just not doing enough. It's an important thing, and I think I suffer from the survivor's guilt, and I'm constantly trying to give it back, but it's fine. Like I'm okay with being in debt forever to the mentors and stuff, because I think there's a lot of work to be done for our communities.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Monica.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.